The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
We usually don't meet this early in the morning if we have our coffee. Well, I always have coffee.
Our brains will catch up with us in about an hour or two.
Right, seriously.
On a good day.
If I said to you, roughly 80% of psychotherapists are women, 20% are men.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
It's so heavily skewed. You know, there's a lot of things that can be said about why.
Yeah.
I think today we're going to talk about some of them.
Yeah, today we've got a guest who started off as a journalist, an author, and he has since pivoted later in life, midlife, to becoming a psychotherapist. So it'd be great to get his perspective on being a man in a field traditionally occupied by women.
He's calling attention to the fact that there's a trend in place, a positive trend about more men considering becoming therapists and entering the field.
So what you're saying is I should become a therapist now?
Yes, you're halfway there with this show. No, I think you'd make a great therapist, so I highly recommend it for you. But yeah, it's definitely worth exploring why men haven't considered it a viable option in the past, you know, why it's been passed over for other things, and also what might be contributing to men suddenly saying, oh, that could be for me.
Hi, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Michelle.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle.
I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist for over 2 decades.
And I'm the show producer and co-host.
Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships,
why we do what we do,
and what causes people to unrelate.
Joining us today is Dan Duane. Recently, he wrote an article and you talk about why more men are joining the ranks of therapists. I found it really interesting. It was really a compelling case you made. You talk about how the stigma around mental health and how low paid work kept men away, but attitudes are now changing. So we really wanted to have you on and talk about, this entire concept. So thanks for joining us today on Unrelating.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let's just start by, Dan, I guess, getting more background about you and where you are today.
My trajectory through the life of work and creativity towards working as a therapist has been kind of a long and meandering one, but also in other ways sort of focused. As soon as I graduated from college, I started writing books. I started writing a memoir. I was really into climbing at the time. So I started writing a memoir about climbing. And I've written quite a few books and since then, memoirs on various topics, mostly in some novels. And that's been in some ways the most consistent through line in my life is sort of literary writing. But there have been sort of various other meanderings. I got a PhD in English in my 20s and I taught creative writing and literature courses in universities. And then I became a freelance journalist and I really paid most of my bills for about 25 years as a freelance journalist. In some ways, there's been another through line connecting all of it. As a writer, I was always somebody who went after things that interested me. And I think all writers do that to some degree, but I mean things that really, really interested me. So I would my life was all about climbing for, 5 or more years in my early 20s. And so that's all I thought about and wrote about. And then my life was all about surfing for another, I still surf a lot, but I was that's all it was about. And so then I was writing about surfing and then it was love. And I was writing a novel about love and friendship. And I was writing a novel about friendship. And then I had kids and I was cooking for the family. And then I was completely a food writer for 10 years. But there was another kind of through line all those years for me, which is that I as you can imagine, in that kind of serial obsessiveness, there's a central searching of some kind. There's a searching for wholeness. There's a felt emptiness. There's a searching for meaning, for something, right? And so there had also all the way through been a lot of therapy. And so at a certain point, kind of in my early 50s, it's sort of emerged for me that's actually been the great through line behind all of this has been trying to feel whole, trying to feel, trying to lead a life that feels good, trying to understand our persistent suffering, why we suffer the way we do and why it never quite goes away, and
Yeah.
how we might alleviate it a little bit and all of that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just one way of telling a quick version of this story that of what, got me to deciding, hey, maybe I should take this kind of shadow side of my life and bring it out into the light and put it at the center for the next chapter.
Do you think, though, that it takes that amount of living to get to that reflective point? Do you think you could have come to that same conclusion in your 20s?
I don't think I could have, or I know I could not have.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect
I don't
someone
think
else
I could have either. Yeah.
You could, yeah. I know I couldn't have. Like when I started therapy in my 20s, it was very painful for me, even just to admit that I needed it. That was really hard for me. I don't know that it felt shameful, but it felt like an admission that I was broken in some way that I didn't want to think I was broken. It really wasn't until my 40s that I was in the middle of sort of several years into. I had one really long-term relationship with a therapist, with a guy who really trained as an analyst and thinks of himself as a psychoanalyst. But I had one very long therapy relationship that was pretty life-changing. And it wasn't until that experience that I started to think, well, even then I didn't think I should do this. I just started, I really remember sitting in this guy's office and thinking, man, you have a really cool job. This is pretty amazing. You have these great conversations about, life's big questions. And I don't know, it was really beautiful. So
people have this idea of what it's like to be a therapist, and I'm sure, Michelle, you've heard this, but you see it on TV, like shows like Shrinking, right, or something like that, and which I love, by the way. But I'm sure there's a lot to it, right? And that's something you've probably had to learn now as you're transitioning from in your career to becoming a therapist.
I really like that question, and just I'll just touch back something to the question you asked, Michelle, about could I have done it earlier? Part of what I suspect is in that question and is really meaningful to me is that, coming to this work later in life, I do feel that one brings a lot to the work, just from having loved and lost and loved again and lost again. And, I don't know, been through all that we go through over the course of a life. On the question of on the sort of, is there a stigma around being a therapist, or what's it like being a therapist?
You had preconceived notions, right?
Yeah, I did. And like the first time I went into therapy was because I kept having these really dumb, painful relationships in my, teens and 20s. Like I would get completely enmeshed with people and have these catastrophic breakups. And, I just really wanted it to stop. So I saw a woman therapist who was terrific and really helped me break that cycle. For whatever reason, I don't think I quite saw myself in her and what she was doing. I don't think it was until, and this is more just dumb mirroring and lack of imagination, because she did a great job for me. And I actually work with couples now and do a lot of relationship stuff, and I totally love it. So in some ways, like I did end up finding my path in a kind of work very much like what she did. But there's a way in which it wasn't until I had a great relationship with a guy who was kind of my age, who I could see myself in, that I sort of was able to see, oh God, I could be the person in that seat. I could do that. And I do think it's kind of a trip how the therapist is portrayed in media. And I agree with you. Shrinking is pretty fun. I mean, I forget that guy's name, but the Jimmy character, Jason
Segel.
Yeah, I love his acting, but God, that is not an aspirational version of a therapist for me. You know what I mean? I love that guy's acting, like Saving Sarah Marshall or Forgetting Sarah Marshall is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Right.
But his version of a therapist in that thing is like, oh God, for me, I don't want to be like that. But on the other hand, like the Harrison Ford character, it's sort of ridiculous in a way, but I was able to look at that and think, oh, all right, I could be like that.
Right. Yeah.
And there's so many portrayals of therapists in media that are really kind of a bummer for us in the field. Most of them, I think, they're just generally kind of ridiculous people, right? They're usually
or unethical or incompetent or
right. They have horrendous boundaries and they're kind of sloppy and talking. It's like, it's not a good look, generally speaking.
No. But there's also a lot of different styles of therapists too.
Yeah.
So I think what's resonating with me from what you're saying is having a male therapist could be a door that's more ajar for a male client,
Yeah.
because suddenly there's just that relatability component like baked in.
Yeah.
And
I think
so, oh, go
I
ahead.
think that's right. I mean, there was, to go back to the woman therapist I had to start with, like I do kind of I don't know. I'm sure there's a very skilled male therapist who could have helped me through that period of my life. But in a way, I think I needed that therapist to be a woman. The problems I was having were with the women in my life. And there was something really valuable about that dynamic. But then, yeah, right. Later to see myself in it, it really helped to be.
Well, in the article, you talk about the fact that more men, especially middle-aged men,
Mhm.
are
Yeah.
now pivoting, right,
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
career, and the reasons why. I'm wondering now, based on your career, because as an author and
Yeah.
as a journalist, you have to be curious and you have to be thoughtful and have to probably be a pretty good listener.
Yeah.
How did that shift work for you? I guess.
It was related to those
Mm.
issues. So, like as a writer of books, like a writer of novels, for one thing, like my impulse as a writer, for better or for worse, is sort of to try to figure out my own life. So I was never a writer who was like inventing stories of other worlds and other people. I was just always trying to write the story of my own life in a way that would help me make sense of it. For years, I had read a lot of psychology in order to write my books. I would read
Mm-hmm.
Freud and Jung and um, others to try to make sense to try to figure out my characters. I once wrote an article about a man in Montana. He'd been a big football star in high school in Montana. Uh, he'd been a major player on a really important championship team. And this was at the time when there was all that stuff in the news about football and brain injuries. And he had this son who was a brilliant up and coming quarterback who was like, I don't know, 12 or 13, or really, a kid, but headed
Mm-hmm.
towards high school, and just a brilliant quarterback, really bound for stardom, and suffered a horrible, horrible head injury in a game, a really scary head injury in a game. And the kid recovered beautifully. He's going to have a good life. He recovered beautifully, but it took a long time. And it put the man I was writing about, the father, it just put him in such a heavy existential position of like, this has been the center of his life. He loves it so much. He wanted to share it with his son. He was sharing it with his son.
Mm-hmm.
And he was at this kind of existential decision point of like, what do I do? What's the right thing to do? And he eventually concluded the right thing to do was say, son, I think you're done
Yeah.
with football. And I think we're both done. I think maybe we're going to find something else to enjoy together, and let go of that part of life. And I really remember reporting that story and being with that guy, that father, and asking him to share this with me, and
Mm-hmm.
feeling the experience of the conversation itself, that the listening was more important to me than the journalism.
Yeah.
Getting to be present as a human being in another person's contemplative struggle and all that.
Yep.
Was such a privilege. I remember feeling what a privilege it was. In addition to more men becoming therapists, I think particularly men from creative fields are making that pivot.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess empathy too, right? I'm sensing that word, because
Yeah.
you do need to be empathetic to be a therapist to a
Yeah.
certain degree. And I feel like, especially dealing with his father and his son, there's a certain amount of empathy you're feeling for their situation. So
Yeah, that's it. And right. And that is a big part of, what one aspires to as a journalist, to being a good journalist, is to feel and understand things from the perspectives of others and share the stories of others.
yeah.
I wonder too if you feel kind of a kindred spiritness with other people who are searching, and now you have a desire to support that and support them
Yeah.
in that journey.
Yeah, well, yes, I do feel a kindred spiritness with life's searchers and questers for sure.
Yeah, I always get excited if I have a client in front of me who's like motivated or interested in reflecting or searching. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
this is good.
You mentioned in the article and just now men in creative fields who are pivoting, and I think in your story there's like 3 or 4 other guys, all about the same age, in their late 40s,
Yeah.
early 50s, who are making this shift. And I'm sure they all have their own reasons, but there seems to be a theme of like I tried this one path and it was great, but you know what? I'm not feeling any sense of maybe purpose or what value am I adding to this world? And
Yeah. Yeah.
talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Right. So I do think there's something kind of almost developmental there that you reach a certain age in life. And I think the 50s are really, sort of early 50s are a really common time for that, late 40s, early 50s, where the reasons that you've had for doing things for the last 30 years or 20 years or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
the motivations, the things that have driven you, they often kind of weaken a little or you start to have doubts or compromises that you've made start to feel kind of intolerable. And maybe you're approaching a career shift where one move would be to kind of double down on those compromises, to move even farther away from whatever you cared about in
Mm-hmm.
order to just pay the bills and get on through to retirement. I,
Yeah.
I do think it's not uncommon for people at that age to feel like, hey, I've gotten so far away from what I really care about. I've gotten pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
I've drifted pretty far from the shore of meaning here for myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a whole ton of time left, I mean, there's something about being in your 50s where you kind of think, oh, okay, I'm not going to die tomorrow. Like I probably, I probably have,
Hopefully.
hopefully, right. I probably have at least another 10, 15, who knows, maybe even 20 years to work.
Yeah.
That's a good long time, but it's not eternal. You're, as I think the comedian Mike Birbiglia put it once, although I think he probably was younger when he said this, but it's kind of like you've reached the top of the hill. You're not necessarily over the hill yet, but you can see all the way down to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And you start to think, you can see down where it's going.
That's where you realize, oh yeah, the rest of this journey is that way.
So I better make use of it. And you
Yeah.
start to worry about, okay, so I'm having a little, existential crisis right now. Let's say I'm in my early 50s. I'm having a little existential crisis of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can do something about it right now. Do I really want to be having the same existential crisis at 70?
Yeah.
Wow. When I start to feel like, man, life's already passed me by, kind of.
Yeah.
I would say there's also two other developmental things happening around the time that someone's 40s, 50s is older parents
Yeah.
who then either need caretaking or pass away or, so makes you face mortality in a different way. And
Mm-hmm.
then at least generationally, older generations have kids who are getting older around that age. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's just more space in your mind freed up
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
contemplate these things.
Yeah.
And there may also be something around our guys maybe having been a little more likely to have done some therapy in their
Mm-hmm.
30s or 40s or something, more likely to have gone there than prior generations, and to have looked at, and therefore to have seen an example like I saw and thought, hey, that's not so bad. That's pretty cool.
So you're in your 50s and you've still got, like you mentioned, at least 15 years of career runway. You've got, people are, especially nowadays, people are working later in their careers, and they oftentimes find that's actually healthier in many ways,
Yeah.
more enriching. I know there's a lot of studies about this, but like as you get older, you still need to have a sense of purpose, and you still need to have things going on in your life. What's the alternative? What does Red say in Shawshank Redemption? You stop living, you start dying, or something like that. But like ultimately, did you feel that, hey, I've got another 20 years of runway here, I could still make an impact, and I've still got a lot of career left?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever had the thought, I've still got a lot of career left, without having also this thought, but not that much, but
Right.
in the sense that I do feel I have, from the moment I started practicing and, going down this edge, training as a therapist and practicing, I have felt like a sense of urgency. Like I want to get really good at this really fast. But there's also a quality in the work of the therapist that I imagine it would be true for a doctor too, there's other professions that would be true in a home healthcare aide maybe, but where the sense of purpose and of being of service to others is so immediate.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that from my very first session with my very first client. Somebody's in trouble emotionally or psychologically, and they've reached out for help, which is a brave thing to do.
Yeah.
And they've decided to take a flyer on talking to someone they don't know in hopes of healing and growing and that takes so much courage, and to be on the receiving end of that is such an amazing privilege, and it's kind of, it kind of hits you right in the heart the second it happens. I think the first instant it happens, you feel this sense of everything else kind of falls away, and you think, "Ooh, wow, there is a real job to do here,"
Mm-hmm.
and what a privilege it is to get to try to do it. So, a beautiful part of starting this work later in life is that feeling of urgency, but also of immediacy and sense of purpose.
Oh yeah. I know you're an academic. Were you intimidated about going back to school? And so that's 4 years.
Yeah.
How did that influence your decision?
I mean, the time thing, the amount of time involved was nothing to me.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing I can do at school, like I got a PhD
Yeah.
in English. I've written like 5 books and maybe 6, I don't know. And I've written hundreds of articles for magazine. Like if there's one thing I can do, it's
Right.
like read a writing assignment.
That's your
and do the
sweet
writing
spot.
assignment.
Yeah.
That I can handle. So that part didn't worry me.
Yeah, that would worry me, but but
Yeah,
I don't-
that was what I had. That was the piece of the puzzle that I did have.
but for men who don't have your background, that and you mentioned in the article, some of these guys are coming from public relations or their entertainment careers. It's a huge pivot.
It is a big thing to do, I think, to say in your, later in life, I think I'm going to get a master's degree now in a totally new field. It is quite a big thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a big adjustment to, if your reading time has mostly been occasional novels and I don't know, whatever it is, whatever we read.
Comic books. Yeah.
Yeah, comic books, exactly. To then have it be textbooks and research papers and all that. It can feel like a big lift, I think.
Well, I was going back to what Kelly was saying about the other men in the article. And, I have this theory that men match the emotional state in the room. And I find a lot of times if you set a state of vulnerability and openness, like men are kind of relieved to match that if given the opportunity. A little scared, but relieved if their whole friend group is going to be that way. But it just seemed like once you started talking about this idea of going back to school, you started other men were talking about it too. Other men who weren't even maybe considering it started considering it, and it was this ripple effect.
That's an interesting observation, Michelle, about men matching the mood in a room, and that feels intuitively really right to me. I've talked to other male therapists about this. It can be, I don't know, you really learn to be good at sort of setting a tone of openness and vulnerability. Like it's okay to talk about stuff. And I think you do sometimes find that when you're in groups of men, like your old buddies or whatever, and you're not, it's not
Right.
therapy time. You got to be careful about doing that. You got to watch yourself. Like you have to code switch a little bit. Be like, I have had guys reaching out to me and, I'm thinking about the switch and tell me about it and what's it like. And yeah.
I think that might be what's contributing to the trend you're talking about of more men being open to the idea of becoming therapists is because other men are more open to the idea of becoming therapists.
Yeah. And I guess seeing things like Harrison Ford up there looking good doing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt, that's for sure.
That doesn't really hurt.
We talk about how representation matters, but in my career, I've supervised a lot of interns and trainees and clinicians. And I've noticed when I have a male intern or trainee, when they are interacting with the little boys on their caseloads, and doing the play and all of that, there's a different flavor, and you just see the little boys light up. And I don't want to make a blanket statement about that. A little boy can light up with a female therapist, but it really hit me. I was talking to an intern the other day about that. The way he relates to these little boys and makes it okay. Makes feelings okay, makes, talking about your feelings okay, I think hits differently.
Yeah. That really resonates with me. Part of what I think about a lot and is kind of at work for me is my relationship with my own dad. My dad, who he actually just died about a month ago, but he was he was a really unusual combination of pretty. He was very Irish. He was Irish identified, and he had a kind of Irish sense of tough masculinity, and he lifted weights. When I was, not as an elderly man, but as a young man, when I was young, he was pumping iron all the time, and had big biceps and pecs, and he was a mountaineer and climber, and so he had this real kind of tough guy thing that was kind of awesome, but he was also incredibly tender. Like in some ways, his great genius was making it safe for me to be vulnerable through my whole life. If I had failed at something or, felt ashamed or humiliated, like my dad was the first guy to go to, the best person in the world for me to tell that I was suffering or felt weak or, so he just was a really unusual emotional example in that he made vulnerability look manly, and his definition of manliness included vulnerability, and he was kind of like physically the toughest guy I knew, in terms of like someone who you wouldn't want to get in a fight with. So when I'm in doing this work, and particularly with men, I often feel, particularly with young men, I often feel my father's guidance and presence in the room, like there was no stretch when my dad's world, like the idea of like, hey, men have feelings too. I mean, you didn't even, that would be crazy to ever even say that because it was such a given,
What a gift.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
In many ways, for a man to show vulnerability, it shows confidence and it shows strength.
That's right.
I think
That's right.
in my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's very much how I think about it. That's how my dad thought about it too, is that the strong man is the man who is not afraid to own his own weakness, and vulnerability. And the weak man is the man who hides it, and is terrified of letting anyone see it. And that can be a kind of the invitation to vulnerability becomes an invitation to strength.
The struggle that men are currently going through nowadays, especially young men, and just we've talked about it on the podcast. That's why I really love doing this podcast, is because there's a percentage of men out there who could benefit from being more vulnerable and could benefit from talking about things, because they're, especially young men. I feel like, especially with social media and all these other negative influences around them, being able to, again, run towards the fire. How did it influence you in the work that you're doing?
One way that I've thought about this, and this will bring me back to my dad a little bit, is that the very well-meaning, good faith, important work of defusing some of the more troubling aspects of, let's say, what we've come to call toxic masculinity in the culture.
Yep.
It can go overboard and produce this idea that masculinity itself is toxic.
Yeah.
And one of the gifts I think that my dad gave me that's important to me is, even as there was this tender side to him and this kind of moral side to him, like, don't you ever even fucking think about being a bully for 1 second, or I'll, you're going to hear from me if you're ever a bully to anybody. Don't you ever speak an unkind word to a girl, or, whatever it is. So, like, it was fun to be a dude with my dad, like it was fun to, play at gunfighting, or he taught me how to box, and there was some part of him that knew that a little boy was going to feel awesome learning how to throw a punch. There's a thing about affirming the positive aspects of masculinity.
Yes.
And I don't think, of course, I don't think these things have to track gender and sex identity. I raised girls, and I raised them with the same spirit that my dad raised me. So it's,
Right.
it doesn't.
Yeah, it feels more and more, and AI is going to make this worse, but just less critical thinking leads to more black and white thinking. And to not be able to have nuance to all of these things is just so frustrating.
We're also talking about just loneliness. Statistically, men are 3 or 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women, and actually be successful at it. So, where there is smoke, there's fire, right? And we're talking about a epidemic of loneliness in America. I think it's like 10% of men have a close friend or something. I forget the number.
Who've killed them, who've taken their life. Yeah.
This does seem like the right place at the right time for people like yourself and other men who have a bit more life experience, okay, and are a bit more, they can bring that to the table. And I say, look, guys, I've been through what you've been through, okay? I've struggled. Let me help.
Yeah.
How can I help? Right?
Yeah. How can I help? Yeah. That feels really right, man.
And listen, and oftentimes listening as a therapist, you guys can speak to this. You're half your job is listening, and just,
one of the things I talk about with there's a friend of mine in San Francisco, a therapist named Jim McCollum, who's really a good guy. When we've talked about this stuff a lot, about working with men in our practices. And, he said this interesting thing about our culture hasn't really had a way for men to find redemption for mistakes they've made. So that guys will come into a therapist, let's say after a lot of hard work, and this sort of painful thing will emerge. And let's say it's something like, hey, I kind of feel terrible about how I treated a girl in high school or something, like it's not that great how I was to women in college, it's actually kind of crappy. Jim, this therapist friend of mine, has made this point that the culture at large, the sort of wider, broader public culture, doesn't really have a way for that guy to atone and reach a kind of absolution and self-forgiveness for that, and to grow and move on from it. Instead, it's kind of the message is he kind of should probably just now go kill himself, like now that he's admitted it, right? Like, you did that bad thing in high school.
Always a player.
You did that bad thing in high school. You should probably just go kill yourself because you're done.
Yeah.
And like, it can't be like that. Like, people have to have ways to.
That's so true.
And it can be incredibly painful for guys in therapy when they're talking about things they've done in the past that they have shame about. But also, I think, really valuable to say, hey, man, we've, none of us are perfect. We've all blown it.
I would hope people can forgive themselves. I mean, my God, if every guy looked back at their high school career or college and nitpicked every little crappy thing they did to somebody, oh my God, we'd all be in therapy.
Yeah.
I know I would be. When you're working with a male client, how do you create space and express expectations with them? Or what does that feel like for you now?
One of the things that, of course, emerges. What I'm really wanting to say is every client is so different and individual. And I just wanted to say this in a way that isn't implying that you guys don't 100% know that and work that way yourselves, because I know you do. I just wanted to sort of...
It's worth saying, though, yeah.
Maybe a way to say this is through, I'll just sort of tell a little story about this, which is that so I told you guys at the beginning that I had this long-term relationship with a male therapist that was wonderful.
Yeah.
And a guy about my age, and it went on for years and years and years. And our conversation roamed through all kinds of wonderful stuff. We talked a lot about Buddhism. We talked a lot about music and the blues. And there were all these touch points that were great. He was a mountaineer a ski mountaineer. And I'd done some of that. And again, this is just a lack of imagination kind of thing. When I was initially, getting ready to try to do this, to become a therapist, I think I just kind of imagined, a practice in which I sit around with other literate men and talk about life's great questions, just because that's what therapy had been to me. And it sounded great. It's ridiculous, but I'm not saying it was like a business plan. I didn't even really realize that I had this vision of it until my very first client was a woman whose life experience was so radically different from my own, and who was really in trouble and really suffering. And she had asked for a male therapist in particular, for, whatever, it doesn't matter the reasons why, but she had wanted to work. She had had an intuition that it would be helpful for her to work with a male therapist. And I just found the experience electrifying. That vision that I'd had of, I guess I'll sit around with middle-aged guys and talk about life's great questions, like that evaporated in the first 5 seconds of my first session with my first ever client.
Wow.
Because I could feel that what matters are the places of overlap and empathy between my heart, my psyche, and that of this other person, where we can find a place of attunement and resonance and feeling. And markers like, gender identity, sexual orientation, these are very important. These can be very important elements of how we experience ourselves in the world, but there are all kinds of other ones, right? That have to do with all kinds of other things, have to do with object relation, with our family dynamics, with, I don't know, just other things. So we can find these places of empathetic overlap between ourselves and clients that operate outside of those identities in important ways, I think. That was some of the most enriching. It wasn't just that one session, but that relationship was incredibly enriching and important to me.
In the 5 minutes we have left, I guess.
Yeah.
And thank you again for giving us such great counsel here. Do you have any advice for men who are considering similar career pivots like you? Like what?
Yeah.
If a man around your age is considering going back to school to become a therapist?
For some reason, the first thing that's coming to mind is a kind of more of a reassurance, which is, or I guess I could call it advice. Have faith in in the life you have actually led. Have faith in your life experience to date, your path to date. It is absolutely great preparation for this work, whatever it has been. It has prepared you for this work in a beautiful way. It's maybe a different way than I was prepared by my work and someone else was
Mm-hmm.
prepared by their work. But the path that we walk, by the time we're in midlife is, can be a really beautiful sort of prism through which to think about helping other people. And it's the only one we've got. You don't have a different prism. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you don't get to choose a different past that got you here. You don't get to choose a different set of sufferings and lessons. All you got is the ones you got.
Mm-hmm.
So believe in them and dig into them and just be the person that you are in entering this work. Don't think you have to become somebody else. That you can't do that anyway. So
Beautiful.
I love that. Taking all this experience, all this life, love, loss, and just channeling it and using it.
yeah,
There's so much life equity you have to offer people. Yeah, I love
yeah.
that.
Be that guy. If you played high school football, I don't know, became an electrician. Be the therapist who played high school football and became an electrician. That'll be fantastic, and it'll be distinctive.
Dan Duane, thank you so much for joining us today. It just has been fantastic.
My pleasure, Kelly and Michelle. I really appreciate you.
And if someone wants more information, how can they reach you?
DanielDuaneTherapy.com. DANIELDUANE Therapy.com.
You mentioned that you have a book coming out.
It's called Yosemite Falls, Reckoning with California History and the Gospel of John Muir. So it's about my father's and my family's kind of, 50-year relationship with the Sierra Nevada and
Oh, wow.
California history and, I don't know, literary history and personal story. So,
Oh,
yeah.
I don't imagine you need a lot of help staying connected to your dad, but I do want to acknowledge that you said you lost him a month ago, and,
Yeah.
and this project sounds like a way to just stay connected. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
okay, therapist. What did you think of our therapist guest?
I love having other therapists on because it highlights a lot of things. One is that, we all have kind of similar traits in terms of wanting to be in that kind of helping profession, but everyone has a different style, everyone has a different perspective on therapy. But what I love the most is being able to hear another therapist so beautifully describe the gift it is to be a therapist, the deep privilege he talked about in
Mm-hmm.
being able to help someone through. I feel that as well. So it was just kind of one of those like spirits connecting moment.
If you put yourself in his shoes and let's just say you're his age or middle age, could you see yourself transitioning from a different career to becoming a therapist like Dan did?
Yes, and he highlighted, we in history we've called it a midlife crisis, making it a bad thing because people then tend to kind of impulsively react to the feelings that are coming up during that time. But now people are being more productive about those feelings, and that's one of those shifts that happens is you start to think about, your purpose,
Mm-hmm.
what meaning there is in life, the second half of your life, what you want that to look like. And so I think career shifts in midlife are a great idea if it's the right fit for someone. Because, like he said, you can double down on what you're doing, and that's fine. But if you feel a calling to try something different, to find more purpose, there's absolutely nothing wrong with exploring that.
Yeah. I feel like nowadays, when it comes to midlife crises, career shifts are the new Porsche 911.
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel like men don't give a shit about the Porsches or whatever to hold on to their youth. I actually feel like a lot of maybe women too are just saying, you know what, F this noise. I'm going to try something completely different in their
Yeah.
career.
A woman's age is directly proportional to how many F's they give, they start to give about
Right. Right.
society and what matters. It's I think it's just kind of developmentally and cognitively a shift that happens where you realize like I've been living to get somewhere and for other forces, whether that's society or just other
Mm-hmm.
pressures that I've felt, especially for women. I've lived for other people, but then you get to a point where you say, no, what is it that I want? And that is such a hefty question.
Well, and you brought up a good point. Like during the conversation with Dan, where you said, you've had your kids, the kids are out of the house, or your parents are aging, right? And so you're in a different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
When you're younger in your 20s, you've got to make money, you've got to support young kids or family, you've got a mortgage. By the time you get in your 50s or late 40s, you've probably paid off your mortgage, probably your kids are leaving the house, and probably your parents are, needing care.
Yeah, and also when you think just logistically, it's a burnout phase. It's like I've been hustling for 30 years, I've been part of
Yeah.
hustle culture and get and go and produce produce produce. Inevitably our brains are like, I need a break from that. I don't want to do that anymore. So a
Yeah.
natural exploration is, well, what do I want to do then with the rest of
Hmm.
my time?
Again, we mentioned in the conversation, but people are living longer, and typically they're working later, and then either because they have to or because they want to. We don't know what's going to happen with Social Security in 10, 15, 20 years from now, and we don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of what ifs. So why not plan for, hey, look, maybe I work to my seventh or my 70s. And what if I do make this pivot, and it could be something else too, by the way, something purpose driven, but you really are driven to get up in the morning.
Yeah, and what is fulfilling? This may be a controversial thing to say, I don't know, but most therapists aren't fully altruistic. It feels good to be helpful for a lot of people who go into helping professions. That may
Hmm.
sound obvious, but if you stop to think about it, I think more men are realizing that it's fulfilling to be a caretaker adjacent. I don't know how to say it, to
Yeah.
what you were talking about and what Dan talked about in his article is that men like to run towards the fire and be helpful and be protective and all those things. And being a therapist is another avenue for doing that. And that is fulfilling and satisfying and meaningful.
Yeah. There is a mental health crisis in this country. And I do feel like there's people out there who really need somebody. And maybe you're not a professional. Maybe you're just a volunteer. Maybe you're just, I don't know. Maybe you find other ways to run to the fire. But certainly doing what he did is a very, very, I'm sure, fulfilling.
Yeah, and if this leads us, at least in the culture of the United States where we live, to move towards a more collectivistic view, that's always my slant. This
Hmm.
idea that let's help each other out, let's collectively build and lift each other up, especially with our mental health.
Hmm.
And I'm always talking about men being the cure for men. Um, the idea of having more male therapists in the therapeutic space can only be additive.
Yeah. Doing this podcast, it's my way of, I guess, of somehow playing a tiny part in that fight. I do feel like it's enriching, right? And it feels like it's making hopefully a tiny bit of difference. Yeah.
It it's also exposing people to other people's stories, and there's no downside to that. The only things that come from that are more understanding, more compassion, more reflection. And so that's another reason I love the pod that we do is just sharing stories. You and I in real time, kind of processing those stories, and just kind of the shared humanity that comes out of every episode. I can't think of any show we've done that where I haven't felt more connected after.
You mentioned stories, and what I loved especially is how he wrapped it all up at the end, where he said what men can bring to this career is their life lessons, their life experiences, what they've done, who they are. It doesn't matter. Whatever your life experiences are, you bring that to the table. That's what kind of therapist you are, and that's so invaluable. And it really makes you think, oh, you know what? I do have a lot to offer. I've learned a lot. I've lived a lot. And I've been through many times what a lot of these people have been through
Hmm.
versus a 25-year-old who can't say that, you know?
Yeah. And you think also about clients, not just therapists. I mean, therapists have so many different styles. It's crazy how different, what a different experience you could have depending on who your therapist is. But also, I don't treat men differently in my practice. Just because a man is in front of me, I don't, use kid gloves to talk about feelings or,
Hmm.
I make zero assumptions about the person in front of me. So that demographic doesn't affect that. I think getting to know the client in front of you is important, not just so you can understand, but so that you can respond in a way that feels productive and helpful and meaningful for that relationship.
I had circled this podcast on my calendar because I was really excited about talking to Dan, and he didn't let me down. It was really cool. I can see why he makes such a great therapist. I'm really glad he wrote this story because it really shines a light on this particular topic. Um, and hopefully, people's takeaway is that this is an actual career path for them.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. If anyone's out there listening and thinking about a career shift into therapy or social work or anything.
Absolutely.
I know there's a lot of barriers, people. I'm not saying it, there aren't a lot of considerations, but you can get that conversation started.
Well, thanks, Michelle. This has been a great show.
Great to be with you. If you're struggling with family, friends, or just life in general,
In a bad relationship and wondering what to do,
or you want a relationship and to set yourself up for success,
then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating.
to be a guest, ask a question, or recommend a topic, drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube.